Good morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. I love saying that. Welcome to another edition of Bridge the Gap Tips. As always, I am Sion.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
You know, Martins. And today, our Bridge the Gap tips are going to be focused on the art that is known as poetry. So for today, I'm going to be focusing on writing poetry. So a very important note a little reminder before I even get into this is when it comes to the art of writing poetry, one of the greatest things about it is you don't need to be quote unquote qualified, have experience. Anyone can write poetry. It's about expressing yourself. Now, as with all art forms, well, most art forms, anyone can attempt to do it, but doing it well, there are certain ways to improve it. There's a quote that I've heard a while back, which I do agree with. There's not necessarily one way to write poetry, but there is always a way to write poetry well, especially if you're writing for an audience. As with any kind of creative writing, you want to write to be able to draw your audience in. So the tips that I'm going to give you are going to be around that area when you're writing to perform to an audience. First things first, what is a poem? There are a lot of different types of poetry, or different styles of poetry. Allegory, ballad, blank verse, elegy, epic. I don't know what's going on with my hands, but there's a lot of them, so give me a second. Free verse, haiku, limerick, narrative, ode, imagery poetry, refrain, sonnet. There's a lot of them. You could tell I was reading that, couldn't you? There is a lot of different poetry styles. So instead of going into all of those styles, I'm gonna mostly speak about writing just actually your content as opposed to the structure you put it in, even though we will touch on that. So let's get into it. A couple of tips on writing your first poem, or if you do write quite a bit of poetry, hopefully some of these tips you can incorporate into what you're already doing. Tip number one, know your theme and objective. Okay? Know the message you want to get across. Just, again, another reminder, when you're writing poetry, sometimes, again, with creativity, it can just be a form of expression, and you're just doing a flow of conscious, which is fine. What I'm talking about here is when you're actually writing for a purpose. A lot of the different tasks we're going to have through the weeks are going to be purpose driven. So, when writing for a purpose, you need to remember, know your theme, know your objective, know exactly what it is that you want to convey to your audience before you start out, and always keep that in mind. A good idea is just have it on a piece of paper, have it right beside you while you're writing, because when you are writing and you are expressing, you can sometimes go off on tangents, and it's good to know, okay, but this is what I want to say, this is where I want to get to, so let me rein it back in. So, know your theme, know your objective. Tip number 2, use imagery. One of the great things about poetry or any kind of creative writing is the ability to be able to convey imagery in such a way that your reader or your listener, your audience, can put themselves into the picture you're painting or feel the kind of emotion that you're trying to get across. Some of the best performances of poetry I've seen have been the ones that have made me feel what the artist either is feeling or was feeling at the time. That's that powerful connection that you want to go for. A great way to do this, use metaphors. Metaphors is when you say something is something else, even if it's not that thing. I hope that makes sense. For example, his hair was a wild forest that could not be try that again. His hair was a wild forest that had yet to be tamed.
Boom, bam, bop, bada bop, boom, pow.
That was off the dome. Also, use similes. Similes is when you say something is like something else. These are just, those are quite generic terms, but they are the best for getting imagery across. Don't sleep on them, they work. Another way is using the five senses. So incorporating the five senses into what you're talking about, just so you can get across that feeling more. The five senses are sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch. Tip number 3, try out different structures. Test them out. When you're writing, don't put any pressure on it to fit a particular type of structure. Just go for it, especially when you're starting. Just write. Write out, try something, flip it, try something else. You don't necessarily have to make your poem rhyme. In fact, sometimes try to avoid rhyming. If you use a rhyming structure, then it's very key to remember you don't want it to come across too sing-songy or too nursery rhyme-like. You still, particularly if you're talking about a theme that evokes emotion, if you are using rhyming, still try to do it in a way that allows your prose or your narrative or whatever kind of image you're creating to still flow, and just ensure the rhyming doesn't detract from that. It's very important. Tip number 4, our final tip, stick at it. When writing, when creating, there can be this dreaded 2-word phrase, writer's block. I hate it. Writer's block. It's the worst. But sometimes that just means that you need to take time and come back to it. Don't try to pressure yourself to complete a poem in one sitting. Write, just let it flow, and if it's not flowing, put it down, come back. Or even if you finish the poem, put it down, come back to it maybe a day later. You never know when reading it again what you feel like you could improve, what you feel like might be too much and you can take out, just to keep that minimalistic theme. Whatever you're going for, remember, stick at it and give it time. And that's me signing off for Bridge the Gap Tips. Stay safe, be exceptional.